application is the compliance requirement. These are the basic things which are very mandatory. One is relating to maintenance of robust and contemporaneous documentation. I think this is a very significant thing to note. The section 92D of the IT Act, read with Rule 10D of IT rules, prescribes stringent documentation requirements on the part of the taxpayer to justify arm's length transactions which are subject to regulations. Section 92D was applicable to international transactions. Finance Act 2012 amended to include the specified domestic transactions. The Rule 10D is not amended, it is only applicable to international transactions for the time being. So, documentation strictly need to be adhered to Rule 10D. Then Part 2 is regarding the accountant's report and submit to the revenue authorities. The relevant section 92E is amended to include. Then there is a scrutiny by a transfer pricing officer. This is one of the things. The basic thing, it appears that there is a shifting of the onus of proof now from the tax authorities to the assessee. And lastly, it has already become applicable, and the documentation for the financial year 2012-13 is already triggered off, and because the 30th of November 2013, we are supposed to file, the report has to be filed. So these are some of the thoughts I thought. Mr. Pankaj Jain, the young speaker, is a senior manager in tax and regulatory service line with Ernst & Young, Hyderabad, India, specializing in international tax and transfer pricing services. He is a chartered accountant and has over 9 years of professional experience in the field of corporate taxation, transfer pricing and regulatory matters. He has served a wide range of Indian and global companies in different industrial verticals. He has been extensively involved in advising foreign multinational companies on Indian inbound investments, tax efficient financing and repatriation structures, transfer pricing planning, documentation and controversy management in India. He has advised Indian headquartered clients in managing the tax structures, including outbound investments, global transfer pricing strategy, and evaluation of alternative cross-border operating structures for business. It is my privilege to present to you Mr. Pankaj Jain. Please take over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Evans, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, all. I thank the Direct Tax Committee, the Hyderabad branch of the Tata Company.
Before I kick off, I would request Mr. Suresh Jain to present a bouquet to our speaker.
Sessions were there, so it's more on economics. So in that fashion, it is less taxing than the earlier sessions which you had. Now, before I jump to the topic, I just want to show some figures to you that what this could be in the going forward. Because as Mr. Raghunandan had mentioned, that this law was introduced because of the suggestion of the Supreme Court. So this is one rare instance where the government has really followed the suggestion of the Supreme Court, but generally what we see is they go against the Supreme Court decisions. So, these are the numbers from the transfer pricing audits that are happening at the tax authorities. And this is what the government has responded to a question in Rajya Sabha, how much money is really stuck in transfer pricing litigation. So this is the number, if you see, and it's one of the rare fields where you are seeing more than 100% growth year on year. So you see, every year the additions that are happening is almost 100% growth. So the last numbers what we have is 2007-8, which already had 45,000 crore of addition. And definitely for 2008-9 when the numbers would come, I think it would be the equivalent to the whole number, because a lot of high profile adjustments have happened in the last year or two. So this was only for international transactions, and these were only cases which were subject to transfer pricing audit. So there would be a lot of cases with the assessing officer himself would be doing an audit, so those numbers are not there, but just the transfer pricing audit which had been subject. And going forward, when we have this thing applicable, the transfer pricing applicable for domestic transactions, I hope it doesn't turn out to be similar fashion. The whole objective, as Supreme Court mentioned, was to give an objective manner and reduce litigation, but it generally happens the opposite way. The litigation generally increases because of new laws. So what we are going to cover quickly in the next hour, and then maybe we can leave some time for questions also, is we will look at why this law was introduced. We will see what all provisions have been introduced. We'll do some analysis what impact that is have on the taxpayers, and then we will also do some case studies for better understanding of the provisions. Now, prior to this introduction of this law in the last year's Finance Act, the transfer pricing provisions were not as such applicable, but the law governing transactions between related domestic parties was always there in the Income Tax Act. So there were three places where this law was generally there from long time. One was under 40A2 section, where the tax authority was empowered to disallow payments to related parties which were excessive or unreasonable. So it's interesting to know the language in each of these sections. 40A2B mentions payments excessive or unreasonable to related parties. So the use is excessive or unreasonable, both the words not defined. So there was no clear guidance on what do you determine excessive or unreasonable, and the term is related parties, which is defined for this section. Now this section 80IA8, which is applicable to all tax holiday units. So where a taxpayer has multiple businesses and some businesses are claiming tax holiday benefits, then the law provides that the inter-unit transfer between the two businesses of the SSE have to be at fair market value. So here the term used is fair market value, and here it is restricted to goods and services within the same taxpayer. So it's not outside entity the transaction is, within the same taxpayer's business these transactions are happening. The third place where again this transfer pricing kind of law was applicable was when a tax holiday unit was transacting with an other person. So if any business is claiming tax holiday, it was transacting with another person. Here the term used is closely connected person. So whenever you deal with a closely connected person, the tax officer had he could recompute the eligible tax holiday if you are earning more than ordinary profits. So basically what in all these provisions you are trying to see that the price at which I am doing this transaction with third party, with any party, is at a fair price, but the terms used has been differently: excessive or reasonable, fair market value, more than ordinary profits. So different terms used, no specific methodology prescribed for disallowance. There was certain level of flexibility given to the tax authorities to determine what is reasonable, what is more than ordinary profits, or what is the fair market value. So this aspect went to the Supreme Court in the case of GlaxoSmithKline. Very again fascinating judgment, because here the question was not on the aspect of what was the fair or reasonable profit or anything. The question here was whether 40A2B applies or not. So in this case, GlaxoSmithKline was making a payment to a sister concern. So it had a common parent, it was making a payment to a sister concern, and both the tribunal and the High Court held that payments to a sister concern are not covered under 40A2B. But still the department went to the the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said they do not want to interfere because there is a question of fact whether it's applicable or not. And both the High Court and Supreme Court Tribunal have held that it is not applicable. But they made an observation that this presents an interesting aspect. Whether how do you, if it could have applied, how will you determine? And the government should consider introducing transfer pricing. And they, as Mr. Raghunath mentioned, there are two instances. Also, they said because generally when the two parties are within India, it is revenue neutral. Because one party claims it as an expenditure, one party claims it as an income. So, and both the parties, if they are paying taxes, it is revenue neutral. Unlike in international transaction, where one party is outside India, so really the Indian government loses. But in this case, it doesn't lose. So, it's also mentioned that it is revenue neutral in most of the cases. But in only two cases, it is not revenue neutral. One is when there are different tax rates applicable. So, if you have a company which is having a lower tax rate for whatever reason, tax holiday or any other benefit, then it makes sense to have more profit there because we don't pay taxes there. And the other company, which is a tax paying entity, claims it as an expense. So, in that situation, one is there. The second situation is also, I don't think so really is a and really there is a loss to the government because in a loss-making situation also you can carry forward the loss. So it really doesn't make impact the government, but government took it only the first suggestion and they implemented this law for domestic transactions. So that was the introduction by this law. Now, what does this law mean to the taxpayer? So it basically creates a compliance requirement. So going forward, so the basic provisions have the same, they are not changed. They are not made any changes to 48.2, API 8 or transfer pricing. So you are now required to mandatorily maintain the documentation to show that I have not done any price manipulation. Now, the government also recognized that introducing these provisions to each and everyone will create a lot of compliance burden. And I don't think so that the government also really has that bandwidth to deal with domestic transfer pricing. So thankfully, they have kept the monetary threshold of rupees 5 crores. So they said only if your transactions with domestic related parties exceed rupees 5 crores, then this law applies to you. Otherwise, a mandatory documentation requirement does not apply to you. So the threshold they have kept it is at 5 crore rupees. I think it is fairly good. It may not cover most of the small and medium taxpayers. Domestic transfer pricing also provisions also exist in other countries. It's not that India is the first one to introduce it. It exists in USA because in USA you have state taxes also. So each state wants to tax taxpayers or the business within its state. So there also you have this domestic transfer pricing, and you have it in UK also. In UK the provisions are same for relatively with the international party or a domestic party. Related party. Now let us look at what the law is there. Now the new section has been introduced, which is the 92BA. So which says that allowance for expenditure or allocation of cost or expense or any income in relation to a specified domestic transaction to be computed having regard. So this is central to all transfer pricing provisions. So it is only specified domestic transactions. It is not that it applies to all domestic transactions. It applies to only the specified domestic transactions. Now, what is specified domestic transactions? They have defined it under section 92BA, which you can see it on the slide. So one which we already saw in the earlier slide, there are three cases where they get covered. One is payments to related parties under 48. So any taxpayer having a payment to a related party. We will come to specifics of these three provisions in the subsequent slides. But so any payment to a related party, you will now be required to ensure that it is as per the transfer pricing law. And then the second you have is the tax holiday related transactions, which again has two aspects. It could be within the taxpayer. So basically, inter-unit transactions of the same taxpayer, or any company having a tax holiday with a third party or a closely connected person, as it is given under the section. And then there is a general provision, any other transaction that can be prescribed. Currently, nothing is prescribed. So basically, these three cases where it get covered. There is reference to 80A also, but I think 80A, 80IA 8 and 80IA 10, they get overlapped. 80A is general, it applies to the complete chapter 6A. So there is an overlap, there is nothing different in 80A. Some of these important principles of domestic transfer pricing are put down in this slide. So the law for domestic transfer pricing and international transfer pricing is the same. There is no difference on the compliance part. You are required to do what all provisions for you apply for international sanctions. Similar thing applies to the domestic transaction, except for one small variation, that advanced pricing agreements, which have been introduced again in the last Finance Act, are applicable only to international transactions. They are not applicable to domestic transactions. Other than that, the compliance, all other provisions are the same. So what are the compliance? Is that you have to maintain documentation and you have to file a certificate from a chartered accountant. So those are compliance penalty provisions are all same. I will come to that in the subsequent slides. Now, the important principle is you cannot apply transfer pricing to reduce your total income. That is subject to tax. So suppose you file a return of income with maybe 100 rupees income as taxable income, and then you do a transfer pricing study, and then you said, no, I had actually got, I had not done it rightly with the pricing with the related parties. If I had done it rightly, my income would have been 80 only. And then you say that, okay, take only 80 to tax because as per transfer pricing, it is only 80. No, it doesn't apply. Whatever you offer to tax through your books, it's only one way. It can be only increased. Your income can be only increased. It cannot be reduced. So you cannot use transfer pricing to reduce your income. That's one important aspect. The second thing is, if there is any adjustment for a tax holiday unit, so basically, you do a planning exercise before itself, so that before you close your books, you are aware what you are going to offer to tax, and you do it beforehand itself. So this aspect is very important in a domestic transfer pricing, because in domestic transfer pricing, both entities are in India. So, and there is no corresponding adjustment allowed. So if you are dealing with your own group company, and you said you are not dealing at arm's length price, for whatever reason, then you get an adjustment in this company, but you don't get a corresponding adjustment in other company. So you get doubly taxed for the same income. The second important fact is that if any adjustment happens for a tax holiday entity, that adjustment is not subject to a tax holiday again. So just to give an example, suppose you are a 10A entity which is claims tax holiday for exports, and you done pricing at 100 rupees. Now the tax authority says no, it should be 120. So I say okay, fine, even if it is 120, I am a tax holiday unit, I should get tax holiday. But that doesn't happen. Any adjustment that is done by the tax authorities, you have to pay taxes. The monetary threshold again is computed based on aggregation of all the transactions. So what all transactions you have, we will see what all the transactions are there. So all the together you have to total it up, and if it exceeds rupees 5 crore, then only you are subject to this documentation compliance. Now this again definition of related parties, which has been amended again in the last budget. The sister concerns were not covered. So 48(2)B definition, you will see sister concerns were not covered. So now sister concerns are also covered. So these are the, so 48(2)B applies to all taxpayers, because any company having a 48(2)B transaction it would apply. But for other businesses, these are the only businesses that get taxed. That is the businesses which are currently claiming tax holiday. So you have 10AA, 10A, 10B, or sunset clauses come. 80IA, some of these again the sunset clause for commencement has expired. So maybe you're continuing to claim it for the balance period, yeah, this would apply to you. ATIB, developers of SEZ, ATIB, ATIC, ATID. So these are the only companies claiming these tax benefits are really impacted. Now there is other case under the Income Tax Act where ATIA 8 and ATIA 10 has been referred. That is 35AD. But that does not get covered because there is no reference to this 35. They have referred to Chapter 6A, they have referred to Chapter 10A and 10AA, but they are not referred to 35AD. But 35AD, which is again gives you additional deduction for capital expenditure in respect of certain ethical business, specified businesses like a cold storage plant and other businesses. There also ATIA 8 and ATIA 10 are mentioned, but they do not get covered. But on a prudence basis, I think there may be oversight, it may get corrected. On a prudence basis, we have to ensure that even if you are giving 35AD benefit, you follow the pricing mechanism. Now we have seen that it primarily applies to what transactions, 48 and tax holiday transactions. Now, once it applies, you have to do the pricing as per the arm's length principle. Now, the definition of arm's length price is very simple. It means the price which is applied or proposed to be applied in transactions between persons other than associated enterprises or other than related parties. So, in uncontrolled conditions. So, any uncontrolled price. So, where the price is basically determined based on free negotiation without any objective of tax planning. So, that is considered as the arm's length price. So, the definition is very simple. It's very difficult to practically apply because the challenge is that we have to get uncontrolled transactions, and when you deal with related parties, there's a lot of these transactions are there which we normally do not enter with third parties. So getting uncontrolled transactions and getting that price is a challenge. So there's a process provided in the law. The Indian transfer pricing law basically borrows from the OECD guidelines for transfer pricing. And there's a process provided there, how do you determine the arm's length price. So at a high level, it is a two-step process. You do what you call a FAR analysis, functional assets and risk analysis. You determine what functions each entity are performing, then you determine the character of each entity, and then you see can you get the similar comparable transactions. And when you can't get the same comparable transaction, you see similar and then very broadly similar. So that way you try to get those transactions and see what is the price they are giving and compare it with the price what you are giving. And if any adjustment needed to your price, you do it so that you follow the arm's length, the price. So once you've done the FAR analysis and you found out uncontrolled transactions, there is one of the methods you have to apply. So there are methods given. You have to select one of the methods based on the availability of data. So availability of data is a very crucial thing. You have to see what data is available. Based on the data, what method can be applied. So I don't want to really go into all these aspects of different methods because that's a completely different aspect, and we may take much more time to really discuss it and understand it. So I'm just hurrying up on this thing, but I hope also because this law has been introduced for quite some time now, the methods, everything, everyone would have a better understanding of this. So you have to select one of the methods. Last year they also introduced a residuary method also, because there is a lot of case laws where the tax officers really try to do adjustment by not following any of the methods, because in many situations it's very difficult to follow any of the methods. So there is a residuary method also introduced. There is some, again I think it's by oversight, because the residuary method, they have not changed the language to include specified domestic transactions. They are still mentioned as international transactions only. For the other methods, it's okay, it's mentioned. So I think that is by oversight that will get corrected. So you have these 6 methods. Based on the data availability, you apply one of the methods and determine your pricing. And then you do the documentation, which is again given in Rule 10E. And this documentation has to be done every year based on what the transaction is there and what all the related data you can maintain for the transaction. So at the fraud level, again, this is what you have to maintain: the entity related data, the price related, transaction related, and supporting documents, if it's relevant. And the due date for filing, you don't really have to file the documentation, you maintain the documentation, but you get this documentation certified by a chartered accountant that he certifies that you have maintained the documentation, and then basically file this into the tax authorities. There is some correction, you have no provision for electronic filing return. Just a couple of weeks back, the government have notified that you now compulsorily have to file the Form 3CB also online. So this was a very strange situation where earlier you had to do every other filing online, the tax audit report, the tax holiday certifications, everything. But this Form 3CB you had to file a hard copy. So now they have notified and you are required to do this filing also online. So it's practically become everything online. Earlier many companies used to miss this because this was the only thing which was a hard copy needs to be filed, other everything else was online. Now, as I said, the compliance documentation is all same as it is there for the international transactions. The penal provisions are also same. These are the penal provisions which can be applied. There is penal provision for non-appearance of documentation, 2% of the value of the international transaction. There is penal provisions for non-submission of the documentation. So, if you don't maintain, you do a penalty. When you get a notice, you don't submit, again you may get an additional 2% penalty. Then there is penalty for non-filing of the Form 3CB. So 271(1)(c), I think if you have maintained documentation, if you have filed Form 3CB, then generally it should not be levied because 271(1)(c) is primarily where you have already enacted particular objectives. Now let us look at the provisions. As I said earlier, there are three places where this whole domestic transfer pricing applies. One is section 48(2)(b) payments. Now I find this very strange that they have tried to evolve this law to domestic, but they have not really made a complete change. They should have actually made the definitions of related party, associated enterprises similar. So what is there in international transactions, the associated enterprise definition is completely different from what is there in this 48(2). Because there I think the law is, the related party is more better defined because they have used the concept of common management, control or ownership, and then they have given deemed associated enterprises also. But here they have, they have not changed the law, which is very odd because these 48(2)(b) covers lot of related parties, lot of parties it's covered. And some of these parties are really not able to have any control over the price. So I just take you some time on this thing. And then there are a lot of related parties who may be not required to go. They may have the power to control the price of the transaction. They may not get covered. So, and I'm just trying to analyze this. This definition of related party here goes up to 4 levels. In the sense that if I am a taxpayer and someone is related to me, someone is related to the relative are related, it goes up to 4 levels. So I think it will be a challenge to really just identify which are the parties that get covered under this 48(2)(b). So some peculiarities here. Sister concerns are covered if you are held by a company. So just to give an example, if my parent company, if I am a taxpayer and my parent company holds some other investments, all those investments get covered. All those companies are considered as related parties. But if my parent is a firm or an individual or a HUF or a LLP and they hold some other investment, it doesn't get covered. So which is very strange. Now, parent gets covered, grandparent doesn't get covered. So if I am dealing with a parent of my parent, it doesn't get covered. Similarly, son gets covered, grandson doesn't cover. So I'm dealing with my subsidiary or my industry company. But if that company has some other investment in some other company, I deal with it. Bilateral rating of this 40 equity, it doesn't get covered. So a lot of, I think, loopholes in this definition of related parties. It tries to cover a lot of parties which may really not have the power to control the price of the transaction, but it misses a lot of related parties which may really have the power to control the price of the transaction. So if you can just look at the slide, the third bullet from bottom, a company in which a director has a substantial interest in the business of the taxpayer company, any director of such company or any relative of such director. So here what basically the law is saying is, if in a taxpayer, any individual has some investment, so he is a related party because he has an investment. Any company in which he is a director, so any company in which he is a director, that company is also related party. All directors of that company are by related parties, and any relative of those directors are again by related parties. So going up to 4 levels, I think it's stretching too far for really as an auditor or as a chartered accountant to really have the ability to verify up to that level. Particularly large group companies, there will be professional independent directors who may be directors from not many more companies. So, and when you really try to find out this related parties, there are 3 important concepts which are referred under this 40 equity definition. Is person having substantial interest. One is the relative, which is defined, which is again simple definition, thankfully. Then the second definition is persons having substantial interest. So persons having substantial interest, I'll just take it to the next slide, it's mentioned. And then there is a third concept is the beneficial ownership. So person having substantial interest is basically a person who holds more than 20% of voting power in a company. And in any other taxpayer, if it is not a company, any other taxpayer is beneficially entitled to more than 20% of profits. So that is considered as a substantial interest. Now, again, and when you see the definition of substantial interest, this is actually preparation of the Act itself. The terms used are beneficial owner and beneficially entitled. So what do you mean by beneficial owner? So this again comes back to the question whether a grandparent gets covered. Suppose I am a taxpayer, I am a company, my parent company holds investment, it's a related party, and that company is held by some other person. Then the tax code says, since it's beneficially ultimately that's the parent, it's basically beneficially holding me. So that can also, in my understanding, it doesn't get covered because this aspect of beneficial ownership is not defined in the Act. It's strange, it's not defined in the Act. This word is regularly used in the tax treaties, but is again not defined in the OECD or any other tax treaty commentary. But in the judgment of Vodafone, this aspect has been analyzed, and they have said that because that's the argument of the department was that this Indian company which was beneficially held, because basically the beneficiary Indian assets will get any tax, but they held that you cannot say that some third party is a beneficiary owner, it is not a direct shareholder, it is not a registered shareholder, unless you prove it is a appointee or it is an agent or it is a nominee. So maybe we can rely on that thing and say that shares are not covered, because they are not the registered shareholders. Unless these 3 fact pattern comes, unless it's just a conduit company or a nominee or an agent. So unless my parent is holding it on behalf of someone as an agent. So then the other part also gets covered. Now, this 40A to B covers only payments. It doesn't cover income. So if you have income from a related party, you really don't have to do a transfer by the income tax. It's the other company which has to do. So that only basically covers payments. Now, I have put some case studies at the end of this slide, so I think some of these aspects I will discuss it along with case studies, so it's for better understanding. Now again, this term which I was saying you have to refer is again excessive, unreasonable, and here expenditure towards goods, services and facilities. So it's written goods, services and facilities. So payments towards goods, services and facilities. Only these payments get covered, but I think these three would cover any transaction. Because again, that ATIA, there it mentions only goods and services. ATIA 10, it mentions any transaction. Just an illustration here of what could cover. So if you look from a perspective of A company, which is subsidiary of X, any payment to directors get covered. Any payment by A to X gets covered. Any payment by A to directors of X gets covered. Any payment by A to relatives of directors of X gets covered. And again, any sister concerns also gets covered because of the amendment in the law. Suppose X company was not an Indian company, it was maybe a partnership firm. Then A to B payment would not fall covered. Rather, it will be from the section. So second important aspect where transfer pricing applies is for computing the tax holiday of the eligible business. So this is basically the ATIA. Within the taxpayer has basically two business. One is eligible for tax holiday, one is not eligible. So this is again a completely notional computation only for the purpose of computing the tax holiday benefit. So these will not really have entries in your books of accounts because from a taxpayer perspective, it is just one entity. So maybe for these there will be additional documentation compliance which the taxpayer will have to do to really see that the profits of the eligible business is correctly computed. So I will come to the case studies where I think it will give a better understanding. And so again, apologies again, there is one typo error in this slide also. There is this third bullet which does not contemplate an execution hypothetical segregation of profit. It is actually does contemplate a hypothetical segregation of the profits of the tax holiday. ATIA 10, again with this any other closely connected person. Again, what is closely connected is not really defined. So similar thing, not within the taxpayer but with the third person, to the closely connected person, which is could be an other entity. Since the terms have been mentioned, goods, services and facilities, so I have just provided what it is defined under the Act. So this again will be important when we see the case studies. So what would happen now since this has been introduced is, so the objective as we saw was to reduce litigation. That's what Supreme Court has said to be objective to the current determination of income. Common should prescribe, but I think it is very unlikely to serve that objective because after this introduction of the law, it's very likely that the tax authorities will closely look at these transactions and really see that you have done all the compliances. So and then you have this transfer pricing officers, specialized officers who will really look at these transactions. And when you really, as I started off, transfer pricing is not too much of the tax, but it's with economics. So you can really be you can be innovative, you can be out of the box, there is no right or wrong, you can have different views on the same aspect because it's a very subjective exercise. And really when you have officers who have got targets, so this becomes a soft target. So this I think will not really reduce litigation, it will increase litigation. So it's very important that taxpayers do adequate documentation and compliance for going forward. Now there will be a lot of challenges in transfer pricing. So we look at through case studies, but some of these are very apparent. That how do you benchmark directors' remuneration? How do you determine what you're paying to a director? Is it a transfer? It's very difficult to determine arm's length pricing for a director remuneration, because what the law says is that you determine from uncontrolled transactions. But if you try to benchmark with other companies what they are paying, for them also that's a controlled transaction. So really you would not have any transaction, uncontrolled transaction for directors remuneration. So how do you benchmark it? So I think we have to wait for some guidance from the government on this aspect. There was this one circular, 1968 circular 6B, which actually dealt with this aspect, and they said that if the company is paying something which has been approved by any other regulator, that is a company law, board or another company act, that should be considered as an arm's length. That should be considered as reasonable. So I think that circular is still there, so maybe we can take support from it, but in the change scenario where this new requirement has been put in place, we have to really wait some time for getting some guidance on this. I think we'll take up these two case studies. So maybe we can, if you want, we can take up some questions and then move on to the case studies.
If you go to slide 20.
Slide 20.
Just a minute. Excuse me.
Yes. Some product claiming a tax holiday. Now the company, which is a distribution company, is buying this product from M Limited and distributing it to customers. So from an M Limited company, I have to ensure when I do the documentation for M Limited that I am not selling it at a higher price to claim more tax for it. So I have to see that I have selling it at a normal market price and not selling it at a higher price. From a D Limited perspective, he has to ensure that he is not paying a higher price. So the objectives of both things are contrary. So how do you balance it out? Can I just do the documentation for one of the entities and say that since this entity is getting an arm's length, the other entity should also be an arm's length? Or both I have to do a separate documentation, both I have to do a separate justification. Because here both 48(2)B and 80IA10 gets overlapped. The objectives of both the sections are overlapping. So these are some of the case studies I think this would come across in most of the cases. So whoever this provision applies, will have to identify what are the domestic transactions which are applicable. You have to understand the implications. You have to determine the price as per the 5 methods only. You have to maintain the documentation. You have to file the Form PC. Unfortunate part is there is no advance pricing agreements, no advance certainty on these transactions, and you will get to know only after maybe 3 years down the line that cases start coming up in the tribunal. If there are any questions you can take, I think I am done.
Limit is for aggregation or only each transaction?
Aggregation. You have to aggregate all the transactions.
So if I have say 4 entities and with each one of them I have only say 1 crore or so, in aggregate it is exceeding 5 crores.
So from your perspective, your domestic transaction exceed 5 crores, you have to do the documentation. From their perspective, because they may be dealing high money 1 crore, they don't have to do the documentation.
No, and moreover for them it is income.
Correct. For them it's an income, but if they are claiming a tax holiday, then they have to consider that.
And if it is less than 5 crores, we don't have to maintain any documentation or we don't have to apply anything.
Right, so you don't have the compliance burden on you if the value is less than 5 crores, but I think that the principle is the same.
48 rupee is always okay.
Yeah, it applies to you. Whether you do the compliance or not, I think it applies to you, and since they have borrowed this concept of ALP now, to say that all this excessive unreasonable everything is ALP, because I think you have to follow the principles at least. Maybe not maintain the documentation, but at a high level you have to still follow the principles. Okay, any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pankaj Jain, for making a very complex concept, I would say, very simple. And I think we need to have more and more such sessions because there are a lot of issues during the handoff, and maybe in the coming future we'll outline more and more. And we definitely invite you to our CP programs. As a token of appreciation, I would request Mr. Vijay Kishore Misra to come and give a presentation to the speaker. I think we now have to end this seminar. Thank you very much, and we look forward to more and more support in the future. Thank you very much.